Welcome back to today's video. Today is Wednesday, September 24th, 2025, and today we are going to be talking about the state of California and Proposition 50 in the November special election, as the majority of California residents, as outlined by Emerson College, one of the first ever pollsters that touched California's Proposition 50, coming back with new data released on September 19th showing that the majority of voters support Proposition 50 ahead of the upcoming election in just about a month and a half. Now, California has been the primary focus for Democrats as they look to an opportunity to get rid of an additional few seats from the Republicans, as the Republicans drew them out in the state of Texas. Republicans put forth a new congressional map, passed it, and signed it into law in the Lone Star State, removing 5 seats from the Democratic Party when they only had about 13 already. Now, the only state that could really respond to this to the degree that Texas has is the state of California, which right now has about 9 sitting U.S. representatives from the Republican Party in this state, where Gavin Newsom has put forth a proposal called Proposition 50. Now, I'm sure you know what it is if you've clicked on this video to actually, watch and understand what it is. But if you don't, just a brief overview is that Gavin Newsom has put forth a referendum to the voters in November that, if it passes, would allow Democrats to draw out 5 additional Republican seats and counteract Texas's gerrymander. So essentially taking the Texas map, where the GOP has gone from, giving Democrats 13 seats down to 8. And this would essentially take the Republican seats, where Republicans have gone from 9 seats down to 4. And so it's a tit for tat that we've seen happen. Donald Trump really encouraged Texas to redraw their congressional boundaries. California now seeing pressure from Gavin Newsom passed for the state legislature in 5 days to be initiative on the ballot this coming November. And now we're starting to see some very high-level Democrats come out in support of this Proposition 50. Most recently, yesterday, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez released an ad in favor of Yes on 50, Yes on Prop 50. It's a movement here to boost California's Proposition 50 passing. High-level Democratic names are coming out in support of it. Most recently, we saw 2 nights ago, Rachel Maddow's show, she had Kamala Harris on, to which she announced that she supported this. Actually, back in August, she noted that she was proud of the redistricting plan and said that it's something that they must do. 2 days ago on primetime television on MSNBC, Barack Obama came out and endorsed Proposition 50 as well. Some very high names in the Democratic Party, and you might think, okay, well, all of these candidates endorsed Kamala Harris for president. What type of impact does that have? But the problem is, for Republicans, California is about 25 points to the left of the nation. And so as much as there might not be a tangible impact to the degree that it might in a state like California of an Obama endorsement, an AOC endorsement, a Gavin Newsom endorsement, a Kamala Harris endorsement, it absolutely matters in a state that voted for Obama by over 20 points, voted for Biden by over 20 points, voted for Clinton by over 20 points, voted for Harris by over 20 points. That is what makes the difference here in California, and that is what drives the traditional Democratic Party voting base out to vote. But the focus of this video wasn't the endorsements. I think that AOC's endorsement is pretty notable, but I do think that Proposition 50, as the data has suggested, was already on track to pass. But Emerson College is the one that really jolted my energy on this race to talk about it a bit more, because I remember that when we first started seeing all of these data points come in, Harper Polling, Berkeley, IGS, a bunch of different groups here, Emerson College was the first to actually release data on it back in August 4th to August 5th, where they spoke to about 1,000 registered voters, where they asked the very clear and clear-cut question: do you support or oppose the proposal to redraw California's congressional map ahead of the 2026 midterm elections? Now, what this was telling us was that although the pro was in favor by about 8 points, what we saw was the glaring 42% of respondents who said, I'm unsure. You see, at this point in time, it was the Democrats who needed to do the PR on it to make it more well known as to why they were doing this in the first place. By August 4th to 5th, the Texas map had not passed, and Democrats across the state of Texas had denied quorum to the Republicans to deny this map from actually being implemented. So at this point, we were in the very early stages of Democrats and Republicans going at each other over Texas, trying to figure out what their map is going to look like, that California had not even come into the conversation to the degree that it does today. So Emerson College accurately captured in that roughly about 2/3 of the state had an opinion, or maybe 60% had an opinion, but a huge portion did not. And that is what was driving a lot of these numbers down away from the Democratic Party. So now that they've returned roughly a month and a half later, after there's been tens of millions of dollars invested in, trying to talk about this race more, getting all of these things being discussed on a high level, from Obama to Harris to every single person. I mean, I kid you not, this is a huge, play by the Democratic Party. The 33% has turned into the most recent data from Emerson College at 51%. And the opposition has only gone up 9, whereas the support has gone up 18. The unsure has dropped to 15%, and their phrasing here, was very similar to that of what we've seen in the state's, proposed language. But ultimately, 51 to 34 is extremely significant and a huge jump in favor of the Democratic Party in just about a month and a week, not even a month and a half, based off, what the data we're looking at. And so this poll release from Emerson, I think, reaffirms all of the other data that we've seen that has come out since Gavin Newsom has gone on this massive, massive campaign of trying to make this well known, right? David Binder did his first poll, but it was a Democratic-aligned firm. There was a question as to whether or not maybe they were overestimating the amount of support the Democrats had here. But then Berkeley came out with a new poll also showing 48 to 32. Then a Republican pollster also found that 54 to 29. And now Emerson College is finding it too. And Emerson College is actually quite a reputable pollster. Their, bias in favor of Democrats is only off by roughly a point, and in a race that is, down to a few thousand votes, maybe that makes a difference. But in a race where the Democrats have the advantage of, nearly 20 points, the 1 point shift isn't going to do much. And thinking about the 2025 cycle, Emerson College also stands out as one of the few pollsters that accurately captured in Mamdani's support in the New York City mayoral race. They released a poll right before the election that said that in the first round, Cuomo would come ahead. That was not actually accurate, but they were the one that had the most narrow. But when it came down to the final round, they said Mamdani would win. They said that by the time the ranked choice voting tabulation came out, Mamdani would pull ahead. And they were the only pollster, I kid you not, who said that in the final round, Mamdani would win. The only pollster. And so for them to come back and say, now Proposition 50 is, significantly more approved of and more likely to pass than it was before, I am actually the first one to say that I do think their data is correct, because what we talked about in the lead up to the New York City mayoral primary was that Emerson College was putting a lot on the line. We pointed it out that it was the only poll. I made a whole video talking about how, this one poll in particular stands out amongst the rest, because it did, right? Every other poll, Manhattan Institute, the Yale Youth Poll, Marist College, all of these other groups, including Emerson, that back in May had accurately captured, and I do think that Cuomo was the favorite back then, but by the time they had reached Election Day, captured in the sentiment had changed. Captured in that the amount of voters that are young, that are engaged, are getting out and voting for Mamdani in a way that maybe, just maybe, a lot of these other groups simply could not. And so thinking about what they're telling us now for California, I absolutely believe this data point. And, looking at what it says here too, we saw that, the governor, in reference to Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was the Republican governor of California for quite some time, he has already come out and said that he will vehemently oppose this decision on Proposition 50, but asking voters, what it says here, coming out about whether or not his support would make you more or less likely to support the proposition. 66% of voters in California say that it makes no difference. Just 12% say it makes them less likely to support the initiative, and 22% actually say it's more likely to support the measure. Because California, as much as they did vote for Arnold Schwarzenegger, ultimately is a Democratic state. It doesn't matter really that he was popular. We've seen former popular governors go on to lose elections more recently than him, and this is going to be one of those cases. And at the end of the day, he is a Republican making the case to a Democratic state, asking them to have mercy when Republicans historically have not. And looking at what we've seen in Texas, I think a lot of Democrats are angry. They're looking for a way to fight fire with fire, and California's Proposition 50 is providing them exactly that. And thinking about what this looks like when it comes down to performance, well, I believe if Emerson College has this track record of being right, and every other data point is telling us that besides Politico, which if you read the phrasing of the question that they put forth, even I probably would have said, I opposed it even if I did support it, and vice versa, because this phrasing was so lopsided in a way that was not, what was actually and what is going to be on the ballot question, which is actually phrased in a way that's beneficial to the Democratic Party. Believe it or not, a Democratic state with a Democratic Secretary of State and a Democratic legislature is going to put forth, a bill and a proposition that skews in favor of the Democrats in its wording and language. But again, every data point, save Politico's from back in July, says that Democrats are going to pass this initiative and that it's going to go easily through the California legislature. And so it is very interesting, thinking about those who have come out in opposition and come out in support. Some very high names here: Cory Booker, Alex Padilla, Adam Schiff, Elizabeth Warren, right? All of these representatives, Hakeem Jeffries, AOC, obviously Gavin Newsom, he's the one who spearheaded this. I mean, this is a huge, huge initiative. And the only people who are really in opposition, if you think about it, on the no side of things, you're thinking about Republicans who want to keep their district. That's pretty much it. Ken Calvert, who's in office right now, Vince Fong, who's in office right now, Kevin Kiley, who's in office right now, Young Kim, who lost, and then, or not lost, she's up for a competitive race this time around, Kevin McCarthy, who left office after the 2024 cycle. I mean, we see here that sure, it makes sense that there are, some Republicans out there speaking out against it, but obviously, because this directly impacts them. And so I think, my takeaway has largely been that in California, on Proposition 50, it's going to go by party vote. Democrats are going to vote for it, and Republicans are going to vote against it. Even if Republicans are pleading with the Democrats to say, hold off in this state. It is a very real feeling, and if you're watching this and you're a Democrat, I'm sure I see it in my comment section. I read these things where people talk about how angry they feel about how Texas is redrawing the map, because if Texas had never touched their maps, California's Proposition 50 would have never existed. Gavin Newsom was not going for a redraw ahead of 2026. No Democrats in Maryland and New York and across the country were looking at mid-decade redraws until Donald Trump realized that he was going to lose the midterms by a massive amount and needed to do anything he could to overall quell that from the Democratic side. Rather than, run the risk of losing seats, which Texas also, that gerrymander was always going to hold up. The Texas map here was the biggest bust I've seen in terms of, unleashing this national redistricting war, because Texas itself was never going to see Democrats lose their map, win seats here, right? If you wanted to see Democrats gain seats in Texas, you would have needed to shift the map by 30 points to the left. And that's where you would have found Democrats in the same position that Republicans had. But just to put that visually on the national stage of what a 30-point shift would look like, overall, you're going to find the Democrats, to get to the same position as Republicans, that 30-point margin gives them, on the national average, 333 seats. So obviously, that gerrymander was made to withstand the test of time. Even a 15-point shift here. Let me show you what that does for the Democratic Party, just to show you exactly why it's not that good for Democrats. A 15-point shift puts Democrats with just one more seat. Literally one more seat. And so I've really come to understand that this Texas map was already egregious in its own right. And the fact is, Texas was never the state that Republicans needed to worry about. It was every other state too, and they felt that by going to Texas and already stripping Democrats away from the very few seats that they had, that they would be able to do that unchecked with anyone, not talking about it. Because really, there were no incumbents that were going to be axed besides maybe 3 or 4, and that was really going to be the end of it for the GOP. Or so they thought. But then California came in, then other states came in, and it got to a point where, ultimately speaking, the Democratic Party pulled out ahead in many of these states. And now, on the national average, Republicans are lucky to gain maybe 2 or 3 seats after all this conflict, all of this energy, all of this wasted time and resources that will still inevitably end with Democrats winning House control in 2026. And that will be the story of it all. And Emerson College is confirming exactly that. Unless Proposition 50 fails, which it doesn't look like it's going to, it'll be very difficult to see how Republicans really make these massive, massive gains that Donald Trump wants them to, because they're not popular. They're not winning the swing and toss-up districts. They're not in a position where they're on track for victory, and they've been losing all these special elections by even more massive amounts than what they lost by in the last cycle, all indicating that 2026 is likely not going their way. And when it comes down to the 2025 proposition, my bet's on the California Proposition 50 passing rather than not, because almost every data point, including one of the most trusted pollsters of this cycle, is telling us is that Prop 50 is significantly more popular than unpopular. And when it comes down to vote share on Election Day, it is Democrats who will likely pull ahead. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2026 House election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.